So I'm Peter Olson, Chicago Family Law Group, and I don't think I'm going to use that webcam for very long, but just to see me once. I'm an attorney who's passionate about supporting families and protecting children in the family law space. And honestly, sometimes protecting marriages too, right? I'm happily married and looking to grow my marriage and promote my marriage. That's actually going to be the first slide I tee up a little bit, sometimes about the idea of actually using a divorce filing, sometimes to bring about change and growth in your marriage. But obviously, not obviously, and I could point to, 5 cases, at least 5 to 10 cases in recent years where maybe one of the parties, maybe even my client, didn't want to get divorced, and there's strategies to undertake when, hey, your wife or husband filed for divorce and you don't want the divorce, and what do you do to stop it? So there's that. But for sure, in the legal space that I'm in, more often than not, I'm dealing with a case of, okay, somebody is proceeding with a divorce, and what's the best way to proceed? How do you start it? How do you finish it? And what happens in between, right? There's just an immense number, and I'm going to go into sort of some broad categories of how to approach and, different approaches, better, worse, time frame, cost of each. So here we go. Eight things to consider before filing for divorce in Illinois. I'm a licensed attorney in Illinois. I bet a lot of this stuff applies anywhere you are in the world, and probably in the United States, but I only really know Illinois family law. Little just teaser that, this is sort of an advertising, marketing, informational webinar, and I'm your attorney if you come in and do a free initial consultation and then hire us and sign an engagement contract and probably pay us a couple bucks. We always do a free initial consultation. If you need to go deeper into family law subjects, all we do are divorce and child custody cases. That's all the Chicago Family Law Group does, 100%. Let's say 95%. I have a couple adoptions and some tangential family law stuff, but generally it's people are dealing with custody and parenting issues, or they're dealing with a divorce with custody and parenting issues, or a divorce without custody and parenting issues, and that's all we do. So, the name of the game is being focused on what you do, because that's how you become an expert, right? Family law or golf or gardening, right? Try to be good at everything, you'll probably be good at nothing. So we're down at 20 North Clark. I'm literally sitting in my office right now. We practice in almost all in Cook County. I live north, so we do take Lake County stuff and a little DuPage County as well. Question 1, as we're just teeing up some stuff on 8 things to consider before filing for divorce. Let me see if I have good PowerPoint practice. Number 1, question 1, one thing to consider. Can filing for divorce or improve or save my marriage? I'm very serious about this, right? I think a lot of people in the family law space, it kind of depresses me a lot of the times, actually. It's just I feel like a lot of lawyers who I don't really respect that much are just in the business of creating conflict, creating, things that promote divorce, emotions and activities that promote divorce. I hate that. And it's really one of the reasons I, am in the family law space, is because I don't like a lot of what I see in the family law space. Excuse me, just messing around with some technical stuff here. And so here's the first thing I'd just like you to consider, or some people may want to consider, is what's the best way to affect change in your marriage, right? If you're having issues, just at a conference that dealt with a lot of this, and obviously in the family law space, we talk and deal with um, therapists and family counseling a lot. How do you bring about change, right, with a spouse or with both of you, right? Here's some bullet points. I don't think nagging's usually going to work. You can do a lot on your own, right? You're responsible for a lot in your marriage. I'm married and there are some deficiencies that I am trying to change. Sometimes I avoid problems. Sometimes things that aren't fun to deal with, like, budgeting issues and, hey, will you call Comcast about that bill? I tend to avoid some of that stuff. And so I'm trying to work on actually being better at problem avoidance sometimes is an issue with me. But right, you can nag, you can obviously do a lot on your own. But now looking at these bottom two steps, I think when you really kind of the rubber meets the road, so to speak, when you can to really make big push changes, I think you have two routes, right? You can do some stuff where there's mutual buy-in, right? You're looking for change, and okay, we're going to meet with the pastor at our church, we're going to meet with a family counselor. We're going to meet on a weekly basis ourselves to talk about things like this. Let's attend a marriage conference, together in 2018. Let's work through a marriage study. My wife and I are working through Boundaries in Marriage by Henry Cloud, and the other guy's name, John or Robert Townsend. Cloud and Townsend are the last names, because we don't have a perfect marriage and we're looking to grow, improve, and be better for one another going forward. So, right, that's actually, right, a very valuable and good way to do things. And I'm pretty convinced that both my wife and I are committed to improving our marriage. But, what do you do if you're in a situation where it feels like one partner isn't in the business of improving their marriage? This is some great advice I was actually given fairly recently, sort of overhearing a counselor speaking to somebody who was having some pretty deep-seated problems. And it was the idea of creating a crisis, in the sense of, if this person's not going to do sort of that third step of sort of some mutual engagement towards change, what do you do? And at that point, I have seen the filing. I think of two things. I think of filing for divorce, or perhaps leaving the residence and sort of like doing a separation as something where it's like creating a crisis to cause change. And you obviously need to sort of look down the road a little bit, and if this goes too far and nothing happens, then maybe you need to go through with the divorce. But I've also seen the alternative. A very close friend / relative of mine actually did this, and what I've seen in his life and in his and his wife's lives is actually the fruit of the best state of their marriage that I have observed as somebody who's known them for 25 years together. So that's the first thing I just throw out there is, can filing for divorce improve or save my marriage, as something to consider if marital difficulties on the table. Secondly, timing issues. Should I file for divorce immediately? I'm putting that out there. I think there might be the wrong stereotype about sort of what filing in court does and doesn't do. Filing a case in court usually doesn't really move things very quickly. And so that's why I try to create sort of these two little lists, in the sense of, there are some urgent issues whereby you should file a case immediately. But I don't think there are really that many. Those are the three, sort of essentially somebody grabbing money, big money, and draining accounts. We call these grab and run cases, where somebody's grabbing a kid and, hey, I took off and now I'm in Mississippi with your son, or domestic violence. Those three cases, I think you better get a case on file immediately. Um, Absolutely. But there aren't that many cases that are really in those boxes. And the thing I would dissuade people of is the idea is that if you just kind of file a case when you don't have urgent issues and you file a case just sort of willy-nilly, oftentimes that's not really the smartest or most efficient way to handle things. First bullet point there, right? The court system doesn't move fast. That's really one of the banes of my existence, is kind of just some of the frustration with and really attempting to be different, and really that really being sort of a niche for us of our ability and goal to really push cases hard, because the court system doesn't. The court system doesn't. 10% of judges in Cook County really push cases. 90% just sort of let them drag on. So that's the big takeaway there, just in terms of should I file for divorce immediately, is to just, most cases aren't urgent. If it is urgent, absolutely. If you're in one of those boxes, file, protect yourself, protect your kids, protect your money. But if you're not in one of those categories, spend some serious time getting your strategy ready before you file, because if you don't have the strategy before you file, you're sort of going to be spinning your wheels needlessly, and wasting time and money with the case in court without really a strategy thought out in advance. So think about timing. It actually matters a lot. Question 3, I think, actually bridges from that last question about approach. What's the best formal approach to divorce? I think was the last bullet point on that page. That page. So I think about 3 broad approaches, and there's obviously wiggle room within these, but this is absolutely broadly the 3 ways that cases go in court, just in general, right? Let's skip to the bottom one, because it's actually the least frequent one. High conflict in court litigating. Everything is fought over. Case ends with a contested trial with a court's ruling. If you're watching divorce TV, or I don't know, they're probably pop movies, or you probably talk to friends about things, and I think people think more cases are in the high conflict ending with a trial than there are. The last time I was at a speech by the head judge of the Circuit Court of Cook County Domestic Relations Division, he or she, depending on who it's been, often gives like sort of an overview of how the court system is doing on a year-to-year basis. Her numbers were that like 5% of cases end in a trial. It's actually pretty rare, and you really don't want to be in that box. I mean, if you have an obstinate spouse or something and you have to be in the box, I guess you have to be in that box. But, most expensive, most time, most anxiety, most stress is absolutely that last box. So, first box, right? Uncontested, out of court, mostly negotiating. I think people underestimate how frequently cases are handled this way. Whereas 5% of cases are ending in a trial? I would say about 20% of cases are actually uncontested. Maybe a little less, 15%. I don't have a pure number on that, because that's just more from our experience, whereas that other one was coming from the chief judge with actual data from Cook County. But uncontested, out of court, here's how I define that. I define those as cases where essentially you're agreeing to stuff really before you're filing a case. I'm not even filing a case until we have an agreement, and then literally I'm filing a new case and we're scheduling the one single court date, and your case is over. And I mentioned a few different ways of how people get to that, get to the end in that, maybe using a mediator. Maybe it's they each have a lawyer and doing some sort of low-level negotiating or meetings. There's a whole new brand of law, I call it a brand of law, called collaborative law, where it's kind of like people are agreeing right up front that they're not going to litigate a case. So there are a few different flavors and different ways to get to the end of this, but essentially my definition is you're going to court one time and one time only, and the ultimate judgment that gets entered is an agreed upon judgment. So great way to go if you can. What's a typical picture of this? I think I have 3 of these going right now in our office. I've prepared settlement documents on behalf of clients, and now I've sent them to the opposing party or the opposing attorney, and we're sort of in that stage of maybe a little back and forth with another attorney, maybe a little back and forth with another party, and from start to finish, from us being hired to the end of the case will probably be 2 months or less. So then the middle path, right? Middle path, honestly, is probably the most frequent. And that would just simply mean you have a case in court and it's taking more than 2 months, right? It's probably taking 6 months to a year or something. But eventually, right, that bullet point there, case ends eventually with an uncontested negotiated settlement over time, right? This would be a case simply where you're able to agree on a lot of things, but perhaps not everything. So then at a certain point, there might be some contested things in court, like, contested issue on child support, a contested issue, we agree how to divide our property, but we don't agree how to, deal with parenting matters. But this comes up a lot, right? In other words, you're agreeing on a lot of things, but not everything, and therefore you need some court intervention, you need some judge input, maybe you need to contest some things with a judge, but just little pieces of the case. And essentially, once you get some input from a judge, you're wrapping up the case. So those first 2 chunks are very, very frequent as somebody who's in this space and has been in this space for 15 years or so. That last space, when's the last time we've had a trial around here? It's probably been a good year or so, because it really doesn't happen that often, because it's expensive and time consuming, I think, at the end of the day. But yeah, important slide there though. What approach is right for you? Very important. 4, should you move out of the marital home? Should you move out of the marital home? I don't think I have had that many cases where people had sort of stayed in the marital home while they were going through a divorce. But all of a sudden I have a few. So I have some fresh thoughts and fresh memories, on this subject. Should you move out of the marital home? Generically, my advice usually is if they're kids, you don't want to leave the home too quickly. You don't want to leave the home, and your goal is to remain an active part in their lives, or your goal is to perhaps be the majority, what we used to call the majority custodial parent, the majority, main decision-making parent. If that's your goal, you probably don't want to vacate the home too quickly, because, right, if you have, let's just make it up, right, a family of 4, 2 kids, 2 parents, and the kids are living here, and now you leave and move somewhere 10 miles away, all of a sudden your parenting time is probably going to get greatly diminished, and therefore it's really going to undermine your ability to get custody or be the majority parent of your kids. once a divorce is going for a little while, my strategy in that type of a situation on the lawyer side would be, you get a temporary parenting time schedule in place. And then once you have protected parenting time, go ahead and get out of the residence if you think it's best for you. There's more to that decision than that, but as long as there's a temporary parenting order where your parenting time's protected, then it's a viable option. Of course, obviously ability to afford and pay and basically fund two residences is not always easy, but from a case that we have going on right now, after a year and a half, 2 years of sort of high conflict divorce, I can think of a case we have going on where everybody involved, husband, wife, kids, are really being negatively impacted by staying in the home together. Yeah, I guess you're saving a couple bucks, but when I look around at everybody in that case, you can just see on their faces the negative, stress impact of the fact that they're living together. So should you move out of the marital home? There's no blanket answer to that one. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. 5, how can I control costs and not waste time? This is actually good stuff here. If I do so myself, how can I control costs and not waste time? This and the idea of what process. We have a Canadian client currently who likes to say process as process, so I've been starting to use the long O. But to me, the really critical slides when I pull out of this webinar, it's that question 3 about what approach is right, sort of uncontested, contested, or that middle path. To me, the other big thing, just sort of, I think that's actually pretty wise counsel and just knowledge to convey, are the 3 parts of a divorce case and how to not be wasteful in terms of time and money with regards to your case. So if you're going forward on a divorce case, right, number 3 there, final judgment, that is going to be required, right? You're not divorced until a judgment for dissolution of marriage is entered. That's how a marriage is dissolved. I entered a default judgment for dissolution of marriage on behalf of a client yesterday, and that person's divorce, that person's marriage is now dissolved as of yesterday. So obviously, if you're going through a divorce, final judgment is going to be entered, and it's important. And the terms of that final judgment are very important. So I'm not listing final judgment is something to not be de-emphasized. It matters. But numbers 1 and 2 are the things where there's often ways to be smart and strategic, because numbers 1 and 2 are the things where you really get a lot of waste, I feel like. Because temporary matters are almost those 2 temporary matters, the idea of how are things like child support, spousal support, and attorney's fees handled while a case is going on, right? Final judgment deals with the terms of a divorce, like permanently. Here's what we're doing with this house. Here's how we're dividing our brokerage accounts. Here's how we're, dealing with things like child support. Here's how we're dealing with things like spousal support and maintenance. And that, right, a final judgment might be critical for the next, 15 years of your life. Temporary matters are really those exact same issues, but you're talking about what is happening while the case is pending in court. And to me, this is an area where if you really can be strategic, and if there's some level of trust and ability to work together, you don't need this whole case within a case. If I have a client who, is clearly the parent who's the higher income earner, and is the person who the kids are not spending as much time with, you need to be funding some, quote, quote, child support, right? But keep this out of court, because if not, you're going to be fighting two different cases of what's going to happen on a temporary basis and what's going to happen in the final judgment. And then that second bullet point, again, discovery meaning investigating financial issues mostly. Mostly that's what we're talking about. How much financial investigation has to happen, while a case is going on. If you know nothing about your family's finances, this is probably going to be critical. But if you do, if over the course of your marriage, you and your spouse have been, running a monthly budget together and meeting about finances regularly, and you have access to, these different financial institutions and all your account statements, this can be a black hole. This can be a black hole, and oftentimes an unnecessary black hole, and honestly, oftentimes a lawyer generating or a lawyer, what I would say, encouraging black hole, because it's kind of like doing work that looks like you're doing work, but a lot of times it's not really necessary. But it's necessary if people don't really know their finances. If somebody's been running all the money, or if somebody has a small business where their spouse is, I think about myself, right? Chicago Family Law Group is a small business, it's a single member LLC that I'm the sole owner of. So although I'm, certainly trying to be as transparent as possible, and, my wife and I are talking money all the time, she doesn't know the inner workings of my small business. So it's different than somebody who's getting a paycheck. She's not seeing a W-2 at the end of the year from Chicago Family Law Group and necessarily a pay stub and all this, right? There's a degree of uniqueness, basically, to the small business stuff that doesn't involve, is different than with a employer-employee kind of thing. So this is a big slide, though. If you can avoid, you really can oftentimes avoid fighting on temporary matters, avoid fighting on discovery and general investigating, and try to get to the big issues, the big final issues, as soon as possible, because that matters. 1 and 2 are avoidable oftentimes. Yeah, question 6 I think is a little bit repetitive, and I think it's sort of a repeat of my emphasis on, if possible, avoid the need for a lot of what we call discovery or general investigating, meaning figure out your financial situation before you're filing a divorce case. In a perfect case, in terms of just how it's set up for us, I'm beginning a new case, and when I'm meeting with that client in the early stages, I'm getting all their financial stuff from them. We know everything, and then we're talking final judgment right from the get-go, versus the person who knows nothing, and then you have that number 2 from the last slide. You're having to do all this investigation through the court case that takes a lot of time and a lot of money just to basically find stuff. You're not even talking about how to divide, or fairness and strategy about getting you what you want. It's just how to find stuff. So, and then I think post-divorce financial piece is definitely something you need to be ready with. Whether you're going to stay in a marital residence sort of while the case is going on or not, eventually you're going to be out of there. And you need to know basically what your home life and what your financial life is going to look like. Where you're going to be living, where can you afford to live, right? Because right from the get-go, right, there's a little bit of an unknown about how quickly or not quickly a case is going to take. But eventually it's going to be over, and there's more predictability than I think people think in terms of when it's going to be over. You got to know in that 6 month to a year window, what is a vision of your life in terms of home life, financial life that you want to create. And then you got to basically figure out, how to financially support it post-divorce. So know your financial picture and create your financial future, I think, is really the big point there. 7, should you move on romantically before the divorce is final? Should you move on romantically before the divorce is final? Yeah, as of a couple years ago, for most of my career, you had 10 or 12 different, reasons or grounds for divorce. So sometimes you were filing a divorce case based on, habitual drunkenness, mental cruelty, adultery. That happens. I think even before, before I started practicing family law, there were 0 no fault grounds. Everything was fault. So I think those were the old stories of hiring private investigators to find somebody's mistress or that kind of thing. Since I've been practicing law, there were always fault-based grounds and no fault grounds, and now as of 2 years ago, there's only no fault. So at sort of a moral level or a basis for divorce, the idea of fault no longer in play. These are the 2 ways, basically, moving on or, oh shoot, no, I don't know how to go back because I'm not good with PowerPoint. Amateur hour here, sorry. I'm going to just get to that slide. But these are the 2 ways, and really the only 2 ways that sort of, call it what it is, infidelity comes into play in a divorce case. And those are, let's put it that way, if you're starting to waste marital funds on the new relationship. Is that easy to prove very often? No, it's not. I have a case right now where the other attorney is crying. The legal work for this is dissipation or waste of marital assets while the marriage is broken down. So no, you can't be wasting money on your new significant other, and you can get in trouble or have to pay that back if it comes to light that you are in fact wasting marital funds on a new significant other. It's a tough case to prove. Though. It comes up kind of as a threat a lot more than it comes up in reality. That's what's going to happen in this case. But if there are really serious big drops of money, I don't know, new cars, serious weekends to Paris with the new significant other, so that's going to be something that's going to come back and bite you. The occasional dinner, I don't know, how anybody's going to really be able to prove that. And then the last one is, it can come up in the parenting part of the case. And the picture on that would just be the way I've used it in situations and could envision using it is the morality of it is not what gets brought up, but what can be brought up is sort of just like if kids are being brought into touch with all these weird and constantly changing new significant others in somebody's life, and it's kind of causing an uncomfortable or perhaps inappropriate sort of home life for children. Like during your parenting time, every other month there's some new strange guy around the kids or something. A lot of that, in and out of new significant others, either just in terms of relationship or living with the other parent, that I would say that last bullet point about ramifications with parenting matters is really the biggest potential concern about really having the new significant other while you're going through, the heat of a case in court. So think about it and don't be weird about how you have the new significant other if you do. Because I would say quite frequently I do see somebody sort of moving on while there's still a case going on. And then just question 8, another thing to consider is there physical or emotional abuse. I think the point here is just really that, probably back to one of those first slides, this would be a reason to file for divorce or file for an order of protection ASAP. And there are a couple ways actually where when there is physical or emotional abuse that you can actually get the other spouse out of the house. And that would either really be through an order of protection, or there's another sort of section of the Illinois Marriage and Dissolution of Marriage Act that just deals with basically somebody being affected mentally, physically, emotionally by the behavior of one of the spouses as a basis for that spouse to have sole possession of a home. So physical, emotional abuse, a reason to file for divorce, and a reason to kick your spouse out of the house. So a final little catch-all slide before we wrap with just some nuggets and common stumbling blocks. Things to just, have your antenna on alert for going forward. Inefficient use of your lawyer in court proceedings. That's a big one. That's really why I like to emphasize, I emphasized early on just about, think about the process you want to take, because once the case is in court, there's going to be some inefficiency and there's going to be some churn with regards to court proceedings, and sadly with too many lawyers, just in terms of, I would say, being wasteful and inefficient with time, because a lot of people are actually billing you based on time spent on a case. And we use hourly billing too. It doesn't have to be done inefficiently, but it is more than it should be. Not doing your homework. Here's probably the bigger one I struggle with. We're trying to be really good with stewardship of time and resources of our clients. Number 2, though, is there isn't a such thing as a lawyer magic, and that is simply to underline this point. When you have a case in court, and even you have a legal representative in your court case, there's a fair amount of legwork that you're going to have to do. And I have many cases where the thing that's causing lag in the case is a client's not doing what he or she needs to do. Because, there are 2 big things. Lawyer is taking care of legal stuff, legal strategy. I'm a strategy guy. That's really one of my great strengths, just in terms of thinking, thought process as a lawyer, and honestly in life. But, the facts and the underlying facts in cases, I don't know what Jane Smith, our new client, I don't know where you work. I don't know, where you bank and where your retirement plan is and where you live. I don't know where your kids are going to school, just all that stuff. And the fact development, and primarily what I'm talking about is getting us documents in terms of financials, getting us documents in terms of school records and medical records, all that stuff that is actually the basis of strategy is coming from a client. And I don't think people always get that they really need to be on their game in terms of them doing their homework, because all the factual stuff needs to be coming from the client, because I'm not getting divorced, the client is. that's really just, I guess, repeating that last one, not knowing marital finances. Um, being attached to a marital home that is underwater or not affordable. I think a lot of people walk in, right? If you have kids, somebody wants to keep the home, but hey, if you can't afford it, and I still feel like there's a little backlash still from some of that 08, 2008, 2009, housing crisis. I feel like our home has just about gotten back to its original, its value from 10 or 12 years ago. That's how long that slump has affected people. And so, if you don't have a ton of equity in your home, why are you keeping it? Why are you keeping it? Yeah, right. And then that last point, even though I have a misspelling there, that's the underlying point. Maybe the third most important nugget or common stumbling block. You want to avoid endless post-judgment conflict and court involvement. As a lawyer, it's great to have repeat business from clients, but as somebody who's trying to get wonderful and perfect results for people, my goal is to have a tightly wrapped up and well-crafted, property settlement and custody judgment, or what we now call an allocation judgment, entered that requires people to never get into the court system again. Now, if you have minor children, is it likely that there might be one or two times that you'll need to get into court post-judgment? Yeah. Kids age out of child support or things like that. Somebody's going to college, now you have to deal with college expenses. There are some times where even the perfectly handled case might require some post-divorce, back into the court system. But you absolutely don't want to be the person who's in court for the next 10 years. You don't want to be the people. I was meeting with just a new client last night where the length of the circuit court clerk's docket on our case is 50 pages. So avoid that. So with that, if you have any questions, I haven't seen any pop up, but I'm just about to wrap. What questions do you have? That's our phone number. That's my personal email address. If you go to familylawchicago.com, you can learn more about me and our firm. We've been in business and doing family law since 2005, and you can actually do an automated schedule and appointment right there on the website. Check out some of our social media stuff too. There's actually some pretty good videos and instructional stuff on our YouTube channel, Chicago Family Law Group. Subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, thanks for jumping onto the webinar. Thanks for those of you who will watch it in the future. Throw some comments, shoot me an email, and all the best in 2018, whether it be making a change to your marital status or actually improving your marriage, sometimes with a little kick in the pants via a divorce filing. All right, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you and have a good Thursday.